Hi, and thanks for watching another instructional video for CSCI 1300. In this video, we will be talking about how to read or write from a file using a file stream operator. In C++, we can work with file streams, which allow us to open files, read files, and store the contents of that file into code or into another file, like a text file. And we can do the opposite. We can write to a file as well. So say we want to aggregate some data and store it into a text file. Well, we can build a stream to write that information for us to a text file without entering all that information by hand. So say we have some text file of information. If we want to do a read operation on this, what we would have to do is we'd have to import it into a piece of code. So we can do this both with an import or an export. So if we wanted to read from a file, we would use what is called an ifstream version of a stream variable, which means input file stream. This allows us to import information from a text file into a C++ program. And likewise, we can also write to a file, and we use something called the OF stream, or the output file stream variable. This allows us to write from code and save our information into a file. So let's jump into VS Code and talk about how to check if a file has opened successfully. In order to use the file stream variables, we will have to use an additional include, the hashtag include fstream. This allows us to use the ifstream or ofstream stream variables. And I'm also going to include string as well, because if we're dealing with text files, we are dealing with string input. So we're parsing strings that are stored into a large text file. So text files are made of nothing but strings. So in order to open a file, say I have this movies.txt, and I have it stored in the same location as the program that I'm going to run. So it's in the same folder as this piece of code. And I have some data here in the file, and I want to read it. So the first thing I'm going to do is declare a string for the file name. The file name here is movies.txt, so I'm going to generate a string containing that file name. The next thing I will do is I will use an input file stream variable, which I'm going to call the in file, or the input file. We will then use a series of helper functions from the fstream library, similar to what we have done with strings with helper functions, to allow us to open a file. So the first that we will use is the .open. So we're using infile to call .open, which takes a string for the name of a file that we want to open. So in this case, we're passing movies.txt to the open function. Open will then open a file stream with infile associated with that movies.txt file. The next thing I want to do is use an if-else to check to see if the file has opened. So we're going to go through two different ways to do this. The first way is to use the .isOpen function. So this is a function that does not require anything as an argument. You can see that it has parentheses but no argument. We're calling it on the file stream variable that is associated with movies.txt. And we're using this to check whether or not it opened successfully. So this should return a true or false value based on whether or not movies.txt was able to open successfully. So if I run the code now, let's talk about what happens here. So we opened the file successfully because this was found. This was in the correct location, and it was not somewhere else. But say that I was to, let me copy this information here down. Let's say I was to delete this file. And then I was to try and reopen this. Let's try and reopen the code. So we can see here that we're not getting any errors because we haven't tried to open the file. But the moment that we try to open the file is not there. So we get failed to open successfully. So we have a catch here for if the file does not open successfully. Lastly, we will need to close the file stream once we are done working with it. So this is really important so that files do not get messed with in any way. We don't want any of the contents of the file to be overwritten, and we don't want to keep a file open for security purposes either. So this allows us to close our file stream once we are done working with a particular file, so that that file does not have anything happen to it in memory. So now that I've done that, let's talk about how to use reverse logic here. So say I wanted to use a reverse logic and check to see if the file failed, I could do that as well. And I could use the .fail instead of .isOpen. So this would be like the reverse of what we did above. So here we're checking to see if it opened. Here we're checking to see if it failed. So if it failed, what we'll do is we'll print the same message that we did before. And if it opens, we'll print the same message as before if it is successful. And the key thing to note here is that if we have a fail, we don't do anything, so we would stop. Otherwise, we would do something. So this would be the location where we would actually, this would actually be where we would do something with the file stream or with the file. And either way, if it is open, that's where we do stuff with the file. Otherwise, we print an error message. We can also check first to see if it failed and print an error message. And if that was not true, then we could go on and do something with the file. So I'm going to run it again and just show that that does the exact same thing. We can see here that we can't find the file, so we go here into the if statement instead of the else because we're using the .fail logic. Either one of these is a valid way to open a file stream, but regardless of which way you choose to implement, always remember to close your file stream once you are done at the end of the section of code where you are working with that file. It's just a good habit to keep in mind because the more and more you work with files, the more and more we want to make sure that those files do not get corrupted. So that's all for file I/O for the moment. Thanks for watching and happy coding.